are listening to Radio Orbit with Mike Hagan on KOPN 89.5 FM.
It's true. You are listening to Radio Orbit, and my name is Mike Hagan. Dr. Sven Nyholm is an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Utrecht University. That's in the Netherlands. Dr. Nyholm's work focuses on the ethics of automated driving, human-robot collaboration, deep brain stimulation, and disability and the goods of life. He's especially interested in how robotization and other types of automation affect traditional human values, as well as in questions raised by new technological developments. He has a new book out entitled Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. It's a profound read, and we're going to learn more about it with Dr. Sven Nyholm right about now. Before we get going, I do just want to say thank you. I'm real thrilled to have the chance to talk to you. I think your work is real important and super interesting, and I'm sure glad that I have a chance to talk with you today, Doctor.
Well, thank you.
Very good. Let's start off with a couple of questions about your background. First of all, where are you located? You're up in is it the Netherlands or somewhere in Scandinavia? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the Netherlands. I mean, that's not Scandinavia, but it's south of Scandinavia. And I work at the university in Utrecht.
And that's the University of Technology at Eindhoven. Is that correct?
No. So I was working up there for the last 4 years, but then November of last year I transferred, 15 minutes north to Utrecht, where I now work.
I see. Okay.
At the Utrecht University.
Could you tell us a little bit about the nature of your work at the university there?
Yeah, so it's a bunch of different things, and so everything from my own research, writing academic articles, books, and supervising master students, PhD students, teaching courses, and being on various committees and things like that. So juggling many different things at the same time, basically.
All right. How about a little bit about your background so people kind of get a feel for how you came to get involved in ethics of technology and some of these other related fields?
Sure. So, well, I grew up in Sweden, and when I was in high school, it was possible to take a philosophy course, which I did. And I didn't really have a sense that I understood what it was all about, but I did get a good grade in that course. And my teacher sort of encouraged me to study some more philosophy when I went to college, which I did. Mm-hmm. And from there on, I was very pleased to be encouraged by my teachers who said, you should study more philosophy and continue on with this, which I did. And I ended up doing a PhD. I actually started in Sweden at Gothenburg University, but then I transferred over to the University of Michigan. And I did a PhD there where I studied primarily ethics, and I wrote a dissertation about Kantian ethics, and so the history of ethics and ethical theory. But then in my first job, which was over in Germany in Cologne, I started doing more research on sort of applied ethics issues, and I've always had an interest in how sort of scientific developments, technological developments, how they challenge the traditional philosophical questions. So, philosophers have always talked about things such as free will, what is it to be a human being, are we essentially mental, psychological beings, are we essentially animals, some kind of mix of the two? And those kinds of questions, I feel like sort of every time period have their own scientific and technological developments, where we have to kind of reassess our previous views on these things. So in a way, the same questions popping up about, free will, moral responsibility, how should we treat each other, what's a good life, what's the meaningful life. But, today, for example, we have automation, we have robots, we have AI, and that's, again, raising a lot of questions that, maybe we should rethink what it is to live a meaningful life as a human being.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about the history of ethics, and then a little bit about the history of ethics in relation to technology.
Sure. The history of ethics, I mean, in a way, the way it begun was obviously in classical antiquity with the ancient Greeks and Romans. And for them, the basic question of ethics was how to live a good life. And so there were different conceptions of happiness. I mean, you had Aristotle with the idea that happiness is to kind of fully live out and realize human potential, to develop various virtues and excellences. And then, of course, there were other schools, such as the Epicurean school, where happiness, tranquility of mind was the main ideal. And that was really the main question back then, like what virtues do you need to live a good human life, and how can you achieve happiness? Later on, during the Enlightenment, you had a kind of switch where ethics became much more inspired by sort of legal reasoning and legal thinking, where, what kind of responsibilities do you have? What kind of duties do you have? And you be held accountable for. And so also, I mean, in the philosophy, for example, of Immanuel Kant, you have ideas such as, you should follow a principle that you'll be willing to lay down as a universal law. Again, you have these kind of legal metaphors. You have the idea of human dignity. I mean, that was already part of ancient thinking, but really now putting that in terms not of what is it to kind of live a dignified, good life, but rather how can you treat other people so that you respect their dignity. And it really wasn't until the kind of Enlightenment period in the history of ethics that people started saying, well, maybe we should treat everyone equally according to the same ethical standards. You also have, of course, the utilitarian tradition over in England, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, the idea that everyone should have a right to pursue happiness, and the ethical basic principle should be that we should kind of try to promote everyone's happiness to the greatest extent and human suffering. And, I mean, I guess that was during the time of the Industrial Revolution, that came a little bit later, but technology, in a way, started maybe coming into the discussion then, because, already then you had a certain amount of automation, people working in factories, questions about what that did to, the human worker. And, of course, Marx coming up later, a little bit later, with the idea of alienation, etc. He was interested in the idea of machines. Maybe humans become more like machines when they work in factories and putting things together, not really knowing, maybe they perform a very small task. They don't really know what the end result is going to be. They don't, they don't have any ownership, etc. And that was, according to Marx, a very alienating process. When it comes to the kind of philosophy of technology that we see a lot of today, that's really very recent. I mean, so Heidegger, basically 100 years ago now, he started thinking about technology and had what is sometimes called the instrumental theory of technology. Okay. So the idea that, all technologies are basically tools, they're instruments that we use for our human, goals and aims. And of course, this is the theory that you would typically gravitate toward as the first pass, so to speak, at how to think about technology. But more recently, people have started to kind of question this idea. So from two directions, I guess you could say. So on the one hand, technology, it's not just a tool we use, it's also a prism, if you will, through which you kind of experience reality. It mediates our experience. And so, I mean, anything from, just wearing glasses and seeing better to, using social media to get information about the world or regular news sources. And that all affects what you know, what you don't know, how you think. And sometimes it's sort of implicitly without your knowing it. Sometimes you knowingly use certain technologies to kind of being able to experience things in a way that you couldn't otherwise. I mean, again, things of glasses, a microscope, etc. Yeah. So technology also influences how we experience things and what we can do. So if you have modern technology, you can travel to space, you can go to the moon, you can do all sorts of things that you couldn't without technology. You can communicate with people in Missouri if you're in the Netherlands, and so on. So, like, it also, you shouldn't only think about it as a tool, but you can also expand the horizon of things we can do and how we experience the world. So that's kind of one development in thinking about technology, not as a mere tool or instrument, but on the other hand, also people discussing ways in which people become attached to technologies. Of course, I mean, there's the more trivial examples of people, like, say, liking cars and giving them names, etc. But now that we have robots and AI that seemingly have they appear to people to have a kind of agency in the sense that we talk about self-driving cars, let's say, as making decisions. You know, it's facing a fork in the road, and so the car has to decide to go left or right.
Right.
Even experts talk about this, talk about self-driving cars in these ways, not just lay people. We have humanoid robots. I mean, there's the case that it's often discussed of Sophia, the humanoid robot, created by Hanson Robotics, the company. And in 2017, Saudi Arabia declared that they had made Sophia into a honorary citizen.
Yes.
And that's really going beyond treating technology as a mere tool. It's now treated as a kind of a social presence that perhaps we should treat with some degree of moral, possibly make into honorary citizens, etc.
Well, you have a reasonably new book that's been released. It's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, so that's Humans and Robots. I mean, I'm very interested in the way that human beings react to or respond to robots and technologies. Again, I mean, the case with Sophia the robot is a good case in point. People, I mean, in a way, they're either sort of on Team Sophia, meaning that they approve of this idea of having a robot that looks like a human, talk shows, talking in front of the UN, etc. And others who say, well, this whole idea of a talking robot, it's really a kind of scam. It's a puppet, and this is misleading people about how far along AI has looked.
Yes.
And so it's a really kind of polarizing idea, this idea of building robots that look and act like humans. Some people think it's a great idea. Some people say, we will understand human beings better if we are able to create robots that look a little bit and act a little bit like human beings. Say this is a kind of road to delusion because the AI is nowhere far near as far along as this sometimes suggests. So quite interesting how people react to robots of different kinds. Again, I mentioned the example of the self-driving car. People are excited about this. This could be, some people are hoping that they find a car more environmentally friendly, convenient in all sorts of ways. But on the other hand, people also worry, when there are accidents, and of course, starting in 2016, people have been killed in self-driving cars. In 2018, it for the first time happened that someone was hit by an experimental self-driving car in Arizona. And then the question arises, okay, so who should be held responsible if there is such a accident? The person in the car might say, I wasn't driving.
Yeah.
The car it's self-driving, so I shouldn't be held responsible. The maker of the car might say, well, okay, so we made the car, but you bought it and you're using it, so you take responsibility.
Right.
So you get kind of a situation where the responsibility is sort of passed around like a hot potato. And so we have this new kind of problems that we didn't seem to have before with things like responsibility, questions about how we should treat robots. And it's interesting how, these are all very human questions that are raised in the context of robots and robotics. And so that's what I wanted to kind of discuss in this book. And I discuss, on the one hand, robots that, like self-driving cars. They don't look like humans. They don't act like humans. And you have, vacuum cleaning robots, lawnmower robots, military robots. They don't look like humans at all. But on the other hand, you do also have robots that, Sophia was one example, but there are others too, that are both made to look like humans and that people respond to to some extent, as if they are humans.
Yeah.
And that's really fascinating, and that raises questions such as, will there ever be a time where we should treat these robots with some degree of moral consideration, or is that always going to be ruled out as a bad idea?
I had a conversation with a gentleman named David Gunkel, who you may be familiar with, and
yes,
I think that we're kind of in the same groups on Twitter, and I like to follow all of you guys, but he's very interesting, and he wrote a book called Robot Rights that sort of brings up some of these ideas. Is your book in any way related to some of the things that David speaks about?
Oh, absolutely. So he's a friend of mine and a colleague, and I very much respect his work. I guess I would maybe disagree partly with it, although I do agree with him that we should take seriously the issue of when and if and so why robots should ever have rights. I guess some of his work seems to treat this actual whether the robot itself or him or herself, however you want to put it, has a kind of moral status and deserves to be treated with more consideration. At least the first three kind of parts of his book discusses that question. But I think at this stage it seems better to ask, could we ever treat other human beings sort of wrongly by mistreating robots that maybe look like them? An example I often like to use when I talk about this is that suppose, I make a robot that looks like you, but I'm treating that robot, kicking it or whatever. It would seem that you would feel attacked. And so any robot that you make that sort of looks like a human being, you're going to be able to find people that kind of look a little bit like that robot and that would possibly feel that they're being attacked if we don't treat well. So that kind of reason, in order to respect other human beings, maybe we should treat robots that look like human beings, in a disrespectful sort of way. But the idea that the robot itself would be sort of deserving of some sort of moral status and rights, then we start moving much more into sort of science fiction. And, of course, in science fiction, we do take seriously this idea. Let's say that the human characters in Star Wars would mistreat, let's say, C-3PO or R2-D2.
Right.
I think in the context of the fiction, we probably would think that that's wrong. But that's also, I think, because we attribute, personalities to those robots. We think that they can communicate with humans in the fiction in a human-like way. But the robots that we have in reality, in a way, we do attribute some kind of personality to them, and there are interesting cases. For example, some military robots that have been given military funerals when they have been destroyed because the soldiers have become so attached to them. You have other soldiers wanting to give medals of honor to certain military robot and making claims such as, this robot had a personality of his own. Are those the kinds of things that we would also accept upon reflection? Or is it rather the case that we maybe are of two minds about this? So our reflective mind, our reason might tell us that, it's just a machine. It's not really something with a personality. But then maybe it might be attached to the robot. We might respond to it as if it is a person of a sort. So this happens to be another topic that I spend quite a bit of in my book. This tendency that we have as human beings to want to read the minds of others. And so if I'm talking with a human being, I'm always kind of thinking that they must be thinking and feeling certain things, and I'm kind of predicting where the conversation is going to go. And, if they smile, I think they're happy. If they, frown, I think they're not, etc. And that's a kind of hardwired impulse that we have to try to read the minds of others. So if you put like a human face on it and you make the robot smile, instinctively you're going to think that the robot is happy, even if the rational part of your mind tells you that, just a robot that is designed to look like it's happy. And I think this is another place where maybe David is going to have, he also kind of homes in on that aspect of human-robot interaction. And I think he thinks, if we start treating robots as if they have moral status and they should have rights, then, well, maybe, why don't embrace it? Why not endorse it? Let's think that we maybe should take this idea seriously. And where I am more interested in asking the question, well, what does it do to our relation to other human beings? And how we, whether or not we're respecting them. That would be kind of a difference between the way we're approaching these things, although we're interested in exactly the same topics.
Okay. What would you say about the relationship of Hollywood and the media portrayal of robotics and AI, for example? I think you mentioned earlier that AI, and I would add robotics as well, are nowhere nearly as far along as many people might assume that they are because of the way that they're portrayed in the media and in film. If you actually go into the laboratory, oftentimes you'll laugh at how clumsy and silly the robots are and how many mistakes the technology actually still has in it. Maybe you could talk a little bit about media portrayal and then the way people intuit things.
Yeah, so in Hollywood movies, you see robots that are able to perform well across wide ranges of circumstances. So, like, in one scene, maybe C-3PO is having a conversation, and the next, he's I don't know if he's ever driving one of the spaceships, but could easily imagine that sort of thing.
Sure.
And the next, they're fighting a battle. But real-world robots tend to be really good at specific tasks in controlled environments, and really bad at anything else.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people have seen these very impressive videos of robots doing backflips, running up the stairs, walking in the woods, etc. But you can bet that most of those robots, that's the only thing they can do. So if you have the backflipping robot and you ask it to do anything else, it's not going to be able to do it. So that's, I think, is maybe the biggest difference between the robots that we see in films and in science fiction and real robots. They sometimes outperform human beings at particular tasks, but human beings so far, and presumably for a long time, are going to outperform the robots in terms of flexibility, ability to do different things in different situations, to improvise. So even though, like the backflipping robot, or there's another video of a robot dog that can run on a treadmill, that can run up the stairs, and actually some of the engineers are kicking the robot dog in the video, and it stabilizes itself. So that looks very impressive. That's probably the only thing that particular robot can do. And this also means that if you want a robot to function well, let's say in a logistics warehouse or a self-driving car on the road, you have to redesign or design the environment so that it becomes robot-friendly. There was a recent story in the news about some hackers showing that if you take a road sign saying that the speed limit is 35, and then sort of of the three, you kind of draw a line so that it looks like the middle part of the three is like a little funny mid-shape.
Yeah.
Humans would still see that as saying 3 at 35. But a Tesla car that was sort of tested against this thought it was an 8 all of a sudden. And so the Tesla Model S has the autopilot feature. And so they were able to make the Tesla accelerate up until 85 by just drawing that line that no human would think neat, but artificial intelligence in the car saw as an 8. So AI and robots, it can be really good and really smart at specific tasks, but really dumb and really incompetent. It's a situation a little bit. And this can also lead to situations where, if you want a well-working, again, go back to the case of the logistics robots in warehouses, that can be also quite impressive. Then you have to design the interior of that warehouse so that it's robot-friendly, but of course that might not make it very nice for the humans who work there. And so I guess the more we put robots into different roles and different, performing different tasks in society, we do face this kind of, if we want to make that work well, we're going to have to redesign the environment so that it's robot-friendly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be human-friendly and nice for us. So sometimes we're going to have this kind of trade-off. So maybe the robots will provide some benefit, but then we have to compromise and adjust ourselves to the robots in order to get those. And so this is sort of another running theme in the book that I am just publishing. We have this choice that for a lot of robots, if we want to get anything out of them, then we might need to adjust ourselves to them. That is not always going to be something that's very attractive to us. Again, I mean, if you take the traffic system that we have, so a self-driving car could perform very well on the highway, but, you know, if you go to the middle of Amsterdam, to take a Dutch example where I'm located in the Netherlands, you know, there are lots of bikes everywhere, old European types of narrow streets, very difficult to navigate for a self-driving car. So if you want self-driving cars in Amsterdam, you would have to kind of rebuild the city, but of course no humans would like that. So that's a bit of a trade-off situation that we're going to be facing more and more as we learn more robots and AI.
All right, that's a good place for us to take a little break. My guest tonight, Dr. Sven Nyholm. He is a professor at Utrecht University. That is in the Netherlands. And back with Dr. Nyholm in just a few minutes. Let's hear one from our featured musicians of the evening. In the meantime, this is one from Yin Yin. I will mention Dr. Nyholm, the best way to get in touch with him, or if you want to follow his work, you can do that on the web. Just go to Twitter, and he is at Sven, SvenNyholm. That's Sven Nyholm, SvenNyholm. Very easy to find on Twitter. That's the best way to communicate with the good doctor. All right, once again, it's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. One from Yin Yin. Then we'll get back to my conversation with Dr. Sven Nyholm. right, there's another one from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin. I like it. Good stuff from the Netherlands. We got more good stuff from the Netherlands with our guest this evening. His name is Dr. Sven Nyholm. You can find him on the web at Twitter at Sven Nyholm. And, of course, you can connect with him through my website as well. Right there on the front page, there's a big picture of his recently released book called Humans and Robots. And you can also directly connect up with his Twitter feed from there as well, okay? All right, it's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My guest is Dr. Sven Nyholm. We'll get back to my conversation with Dr. Nyholm right now. Yeah, I think, up until very recently, as you mentioned, robots have primarily been relegated to controlled, designed environments. And now we're approaching a time where we have robots navigating freely in the world and interacting with humans and animals and things like that. This seems to me to be a sort of a line that's being crossed there.
Yeah, and most robots that are useful so far yet do that. I mean, they're not out in the wild, so to speak. But the self-driving car, that's something that's being at least experimented with in traffic out in the world, so to speak. And you have, there's some experimentation on, at least on university campuses with, for example, delivery robots. The robot might deliver a pizza or mail or packages or whatever. You have maybe the idea of delivery drones, so flying in the air, delivering things.
Yeah.
And so anytime you sort of let the robot out of the laboratory or out of the controlled environment, you face all kinds of challenges. And tonight, technical university with lots of engineers, and not all of them, but a lot of them, they think about small technical problems and with small solutions, and how can you make the room to the other, let's say, that has a lot of people in it. You also have to start thinking about the social, that people behave in unexpected, unpredictable ways. They don't follow rules, and they maybe don't want the things that you designed the robots to do. And that all can create new kinds of challenges that maybe if I was an engineer designing a robot to solve a particular task, I didn't take into account. I mean, to again talk about the self-driving cars case, human beings, we tend to break traffic rules. We speed, we drive aggressively, we accelerate, sometimes not very gently, or brake not very gently. But the self-driving car, at least for now, is an attempt to create a more sort of optimized type of driving. So you would have a robot that always follows the speed limit, that accelerates gently, brakes gently, drives at a safe distance from other cars, etc. And if you take that kind of driving and you put it together with human driving, you have a kind of compatibility problem. And a lot of the minor accidents that have, including also the major accidents, but a lot of the accidents that have happened with self-driving cars are due to a kind of mismatch between the driving styles of humans and the driving styles of self-driving cars. And so you get these kind of questions. So again, should we adjust the self-driving cars to humans by making them speed, disobey various traffic rules, making them drive aggressively? And you do have people that argue that, yes, this is a good idea. But then again, then you would counteract this goal of creating a safer, more environmentally friendly, more optimized kind of driving. And if you want a self-driving car that drives like a human, in a way, you can just have a human do the driving. You don't a robot, AI system to do it. So the other option then would be to try to adjust human driving to self-driving cars. And there are ways in which you can do it. I mean, you could put in speed limiting technology into cars so that it's impossible to speed. I mean, some trucks have this. Mm-hmm. You could put in alcohol locks so that at the very least everyone is always sober when they're driving. Yeah. You could, punish people more severely, even more severely if they cause an accident, and in those ways make people more like robots in their driving. But we're going to have to do something in order to kind of adjust human driving and self-driving car, robotic driving to each other, at least during the long period that a lot of experts foresee where there would be both kinds of cars on the road. It's like even if we eventually transition to only having robotic self-driving cars, there's still going to be a very long period where people are still, they can't afford to buy a new car. They want to use the family car.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they buy a car with some degree of automation, but not full automation. And so you have generations of cars on the road with more or less automation, with maybe incompatible types of gear and programming in them. And it might be a little bit chaotic. And, even if you then maybe, you only have self-driving cars, that's going to be a long period of mixed traffic before we get to that point.
You've talked a little bit about the ethics of accidents and the algorithms that are used in self-driving cars that have to make a decision at some point. Perhaps you could talk about the trolley problem and how that might apply to self-driving cars.
Yeah, so, the trolley problem is a philosophical thought experiment that was, created in 1967, if I remember correctly, by a philosopher called Philippa Foot. And so she imagined a scenario where there's a train going down the train tracks, and then there's a guy standing next to a switch, and he can see that if he doesn't do anything, the train is going to hit 5 people who are on the track. But he can pull the switch and send the train off. But sadly, there's one person there. And so in order to save the 5, you'd have to redirect the trolley train onto the side track. And people are asked, what do you do with? A lot of people say yes. And then in order to kind of tease out saving the many by sacrificing the few, philosophers have come up with lots of different variations on this theme.
Mm-hmm.
There's one variation where rather than redirecting the train onto a side track, you have to push someone in front of the train, a very heavy, large person, so that the heavy weight of this person would sort of set off the automatic brakes of the train. The 5 on the tracks would be saved that way, but now you have to physically push some of the train. So now a lot of people say you shouldn't do it, and then philosophers since then have kind of come up with various different versions of this case, and that's been treated up until recently as a kind of purely intellectual exercise, going to tease out people's moral intuitions. But then, about 5 years ago, people started saying, now we actually have a kind of real-world trolley problem that we're facing, namely self-driving cars sometimes going to be driving into scenarios where it's obvious to them that they can't simply stop because they're driving too fast. Maybe there's something wrong with the brakes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go straight, let's say maybe there are 5 people on the road. If they go onto the sidewalk, maybe there's them there. So what should the self-driving car be programmed to do?
Yes.
Or, in another version of the case, you might have, let's say, 1 person on the street, 5 people in the self-car. If the car is going straight, it's going to hit that 1 person. It's off the road, it's going to go off a cliff or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can really very easily come up with sort of scenarios that, of course, a lot of them are very unrealistic, but some of them might possibly be more realistic. So the self-driving car might have a choice between crashing into another car or going off the road, thus risking things for the person in the car. So there's a question, should the car always prioritize the safety of whoever's in the car, or should it sometimes try to detect whether the situation calls, if there's a way of minimizing overall harm, which might mean that the people in the car will be sacrificed. So a lot of people have been saying, so now we actually have a kind of real-world trolley problem to deal with. And, in some of my research, and partly just because so many people had been saying that, I was asking myself, is it really like the trolley problem? And are the issues that were discussed in the trolley problem literature really the ones we should be focusing on? And at the very least, there are some interesting sort of disanalogies between these different cases. So the philosophical thought experiment, for example, we're typically asked to only focus on a very small set of aspects of the scenario. Just focus on the fact that there are 5 people on the tracks. The way to save the 5 is to redirect the train onto the side track. There's 1 person there. Set everything else aside and make a decision. We're asked, when we're doing this in a kind of philosophy classroom. But in a real world, a real life, we should take as many considerations as possible into consideration. And not just say, let's just focus on a small subset of possible relevant facts. So that's sort of one big key difference. Another is that I actually taught a class as early as a couple of days ago where I brought up the trolley problem because it has a nice sort of pedagogical value. And then it always happens that a student raises their hand and says, well, won't I go to jail if I kill this other person, on to say the 5? And then in the philosophy classroom, you always say, well, let's set questions about legal and moral responsibility aside, and let's just think about, what you should do in this scenario. But, if you're thinking about the real-world ethics of self-driving cars, you can't set responsibility to think about it, because that's obviously whenever there's a car accident, it's always when people die, there's an investigation. There's always a question of whose fault it was, if anyone's fault. If it was anyone's fault, there's a question of should anyone be punished, held responsible for this. That's another thing that kind of clashes a little bit with the way that we use this idea in philosophy classrooms. A third thing, in the trolley problem examples, you assume that you know all the facts with certainty. So you know that if I push the large person in front of the train, let's say, I know that it's a fine. Or if I redirect the train with the switch in the other example, I know again that I can say 5. I know I have to sacrifice 1. When it comes to self-driving cars and these hypothetical scenarios that they might be facing, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And so we have to make risk assessments and probability assessments. And we basically are planning for a scenario that may or may not. And so that's another kind of relevant difference, this important role of uncertainty and risk in real life as opposed to in a philosophical thought experiment. That's not to say that the trolley problem stuff of philosophy is wholly irrelevant. There are lots of interesting things that have come out of that discussion. But it is just to say that we should be a little bit more careful than some, both academics and journalists have been, before we say, oh, just like the trolley problem, because there are obviously many more complications and complexities in real life than in a philosophical thought experiment.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about human enhancement. This is becoming something that is bringing up a lot of questions as well. The idea that we can do things with technology to either enhance our own bodies, change them significantly. How does that play into the work that you do? Yeah,
that's something I've done a certain amount of work on as well. So one interesting thing about human enhancement is that, in real life, there are people who do what they call biohacking, use their own bodies as kind of, experimental tools. They're trying to come up with ways of enhance themselves. But in terms of more research, things that could possibly be used as enhancements are typically discovered as a kind of side effects of other things. And so take something that I looked at quite a bit in my own research, namely what's called deep brain stimulation. So Parkinson's patients, for example, and other people with different kinds of problems, neurological problems, have sometimes electrodes implanted into their brain.
Okay.
There's a sort of a current that stimulates certain brain loops. This can be amazing. So a person with Parkinson's can regain control over their tremors and kind of walk fluently and talk fluently, etc., when electric current is turned on and the brain stimulation is working properly. In some people, though, this has interesting side effects. And those side effects range from very positive, sometimes comical, to scary and the opposite of comical. So there was one patient who found that their memory had been improved with the deep brain stimulation. Another patient, the Dutch patient, felt much happier with the brain stimulation turned on. They were not being treated for depression. They were being treated for something else. And actually, in that particular case, the thing that they were trying to treat with the deep brain stimulation, it wasn't helping, but the person felt much happier. And so she said to her doctor, leave it on because I feel so much happier now. But the doctor in that case said, no, I'm going to turn this off because, it didn't help for what we were trying to treat. it just made you happier. And I, as a doctor, am not in the business of making you happier. So that was an interesting case where you saw kind of a certain kind of enhancement as a side effect, but the treatment that was aimed at did not happen. Another example, and I have a friend, Brian Earp and Julie Savulescu, they just published a book about what they call love enhancement.
Yeah.
So a lot of drugs that are used for other things. I mean, for example, antidepressant drugs and drugs such as the ones that are used maybe to treat post-traumatic stress disorder, they also affect how we feel about the people around us, and also they can make us more trusting. They can open us up to things that we wouldn't otherwise be willing to do, to talk about certain topics, let's say, that we wouldn't otherwise be willing to talk about. They can change our emotions. And this could actually be used, Earp and Savulescu argue, to maybe improve human relationships. So maybe there could be a kind of love enhancement. And that's the case where any development that we've seen has been a kind of a side effect or discovered by accident, and people have kind of been trying to come up with treatments for other things. So I've been quite interested in that topic too. And the question of, let's say that we actually able to develop very precise ways of tuning our emotions, a little bit as if we, on a stereo, have different dials, you can change the treble and the bass, etc., so that you could change the settings in your emotional life to fit your ideas of what you want. It's interesting. I mean, that, again, goes in a little bit in the direction of science fiction, but we can certainly influence how people feel in a more, in a less precise way. You can start wondering then, if I find that my romantic partner, I didn't know beforehand that they were using these love enhancement drugs, but I learned one day that indeed they are. Before they started using them, they couldn't really make themselves feel attached to me. I think a lot of people would find that to be sort of bad news. What they want is something what they think of as authentic. Of course, this raises the question of what exactly is meant by authentic love. And maybe in some cases, inauthentic love would be better than no love, broken marriage, etc. But we can also ask this question of, okay, so is this all that we're wanting out of, let's say, love or happiness? Do we want it to be caused by, let's say, brain stimulation technology or some love drug or a hormone treatment? Or do we also care about the causes? Do we want it to be the case that our partners love us because we are the way we are who we are? Do we want happiness to depend on having achieved something that we think makes us worthy of happiness? So I think that's one very interesting thing that comes up when we start thinking about technological ways of changing how we feel, how we act. We do have a lot of ideas about what we deserve, or what our behavior makes us worthy of, and we care about why other people think what they think about us. Is it because they have true beliefs about us, because they know us, or is it because we were able to fool them, or because they are under the influence of some drug? I think that raises sort of deep questions about what we truly care about and value in our own lives, but also in our relationships with the people around us.
You've addressed the idea of sexual robots and even love, perhaps, between humans and robots. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's an interesting development in the world of robotics, namely the attempt to build what are sometimes called sex robots. And one very interesting development is that there are at least 3 companies that have been sort of in the news, and that whenever there's a new story about sex robots, you hear about them. One company has made a robot that they call Roxy, spelled with 3 X's. Another has made a robot that they call Harmony, and a third has made a robot that they call Samantha. And even though these were developed as sex robots for sexual purposes primarily, there's been a kind of interesting development, but for all of them, the companies behind them are starting to suggest, well, maybe this could be more than something that's there for sex. Maybe it could also be something that could, a robot that could be a romantic partner, a friend. Roxy, the website on which you can read about that robot is called True Companion. You can read there that this robot supposedly can know your name, can get to know you, can get to like you and be a true friend. The robot Harmony is also supposed to be, emotionally engaging with the user, so it's a kind of bond. And of course, these people looking at this robot, they're studying human psychology and what we know about what kinds of buttons you can push to make people feel attached to other human beings, and trying to create sort of the robotic equivalent of that. And so it raises the question of whether, on the one hand, if there's something unethical about creating a robot that would maybe lead people to think that the robot cares about them. This could be deceptive. It could be thought to take advantage of sort of vulnerable, lonely people. It could be thought to maybe make people, if you say, let's say someone gets very attached to such a robot and maybe they mostly interact with it, then they might not get any training in having human relationships of a kind of an intimate, romantic kind, and so they become sort of less able, perhaps, to have human romantic relationships. Those are some worries that you might have. On the other hand, you might also ask, okay, could there be a difference where the idea of human-robot love could make sense? And that, again, I think, raises the kind of questions that we mentioned just a moment ago when we talked about love enhancement. So what do we really want or value in love? And could you achieve those things with a robot? And you can ask, for example, commonly associated ideas that are associated with love. People talk about things such as being a good match, for example.
Yeah.
So it should be the case that, romantic partners, they, match for the other, and the other is also a good match for him or her. And so you can make a robot that's sort of custom-made to fit your taste and your likes and dislikes. But this ideal of having a good match would also seem to suggest that, you should be a good match for the robot. So that's one kind of challenge. Another idea would be that, when we value human relationships, we often think that there's a kind of commitment there. And that brings up the idea of sort of free choice, because even though you want your partner, your lover, to have certain feelings for you, you also want them maybe to commit to you, and you think that it's possible for them to do otherwise. So if you have something like a marriage ceremony and the person to be your lawfully wedded husband or wife, whatever, there seems to be an element of choice there. And if you really thought that the person you're marrying had some sort of compulsion and they couldn't do otherwise, and they will stick with you too, no matter what, and if they're slavishly devoted to you, that might start looking quite different than what you are looking for if you're looking for someone to commit to you. And so they would seem that the idea of a relationship involves the idea of choice. And so you might ask, could a sex robot that's supposed to love you, could it have a choice? Could it be that the sex robot might choose, say, no, I'm not ready to commit, or that it says, I could do otherwise, but I will commit. That sounds, again, like a crazy idea. But so you see that when you start thinking about these things that we value in the human case, it might start looking unrealistic to think that the robot could play that role of a romantic partner in the same way that a human could, because it really requires capacity for choice, the idea that you could be a better or worse match for someone else. And so I find that really fascinating. So that's certainly something I've been thinking about when I think about human robots and the human-robot interaction in my book as well.
All right, there we go. That's another good place to take a break here. You listen to Radio Orbit. It's KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. My name is Mike Hagan. My guest tonight is Dr. Sven Nyholm, assistant professor of ethics at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. You can find him online at Sven Nyholm on Twitter. And if you just want to click over there to my site, there's a big image of his new book that's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. It's a wonderful book, and you can get a look at it on the front page of my website there, and if you click on it, it'll take you right over to over to Sven. All right, we're going to take a little break here, and I'll come back with the final 25 minutes or so of my interview with Dr. Sven Nyholm. In the meantime, we're going to hear one from our featured musicians of the evening. They're called Yin Yin, and this is called Sui Ya. All right, it's Mike, Radio Orbit, KOPN Columbia. Back in a few minutes. All right, another one from Yin Yin. Digging the music tonight. Hope you're liking it as well. It's Mike. You're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia, 89.5 FM. All right, it's just about 20 minutes after midnight now on the 2nd of June, 2020. You've joined me right in the middle of an interview that I recorded just a little bit ago with Dr. Sven Nyholm from Utrecht University in the Netherlands. We are talking about artificial intelligence and robotics and technology in general and some of the moral, ethical implications of such technology. Dr. Nyholm has a brand new book. It's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. You can find information about him on the web at Sven Nyholm on Twitter, and you can also link directly to him from my site at mikehagan.com. All right, we're on the web streaming tonight at www.kopn.org. Appreciate y'all joining me, and let's get back to our interview now with Dr. Sven Nyholm. Yeah, one of the things that I had on my list here to talk with you about was the thoughts and images in our minds about robots and what they tell us about ourselves and what it is to be human. You've talked about that a little bit. Maybe you could say a few words to that.
Yeah, so there is, for example, a Japanese robotics researcher, and I think, if I remember correctly, his name is Hiroshi Ishiguro, and he is creating robots that look like humans. I mean, one of them is a robotic copy of himself. He has also created a robot that looks like a human female called Erica. And when people ask him, why are you creating these human-like robots? One of the things he tends to say is that, we humans can understand ourselves better if we can create robots that look like us. The robot Sophia, which is made to look like human as well, they too say that we can understand human beings better if we create robots that are like humans. And so I think that we project ideas about ourselves onto these robots that we create, at least if those robots are meant to be like humans. Of course, it's a bomb disposal robot or a self-driving car or a lawnmower or a vacuum cleaner. Those are not going to look like humans. They're not going to act like humans. And so they're not going to be kind of a mirror for humans to look into. But I do think that there is a deep fascination that a lot of people share with the idea of creating a robot that's like a human. And a lot of people find it scary, and sometimes people talk about what they call the uncanny valley. This is the idea that if a robot is kind of like a human but not really, that's eerie, and that gives rise to a kind of a very strange feeling of discomfort. It's familiar, yet it's alien, it's strange at the same time. So some people do research about how can we create human-like robots that are clearly not human, but they're somewhat human-like, but that don't give rise to that eerie feeling that's associated with this idea of the uncanny valley. So you have mixed emotions, I think, about the idea of humanoid robots in most people, and it doesn't seem possible to kind of stop people from wanting and trying to create robots. And so in a way, I think we have to try to reckon with that development and think about, how should we react to this? Of course, you can ban some people say we should ban the creation of sex robots. There's a campaign against humanoid sex robots. It's called the Campaign Against Sex Robots. And they say, for example, that it should be forbidden to create robots that look like humans and are made for sexual purposes. But it's going to be very hard to manage to ban that, because if you have robots that are not created for sexual purposes, the idea of having sex with them seems to be something that comes up in people's minds. I mean, in a lot of movies and TV series and so on, where there are humanoid robots that are not made for sexual purposes, that's the sort of thing. I mean, it's the movie Ex Machina, for example, or
Fantastic.
the TV series, I think it's called Real Humans. In both of those, you have robots created for other purposes, but the human characters in them, they want to have sex with these robots.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be something you see. I mean, there's even a robot that doesn't look very much like a human. It's called Pepper. It looks a little bit like a mix between an alien or something like that. But the instruction manual says, don't try to have sex with this robot. So there is this attraction to, mixed feelings about, and fascination with, I think, the idea of humanoid robots, humans that look and act like humans. And so that's something that we're going to have to deal with as a society, I think.
Okay. All right, let's switch gears here a little bit. I've got a few more questions for you. We haven't talked much about military applications and about how this affects the way we look at ethics, for example, the ethics of war or the ethics of courage, these types of things. Could you talk a little bit about military applications of AI and robotics and how how this plays out in the ethical field. I think that many of these technologies are actually utilized perhaps initially in the military sphere to begin with before they filter down into the public sort of sphere. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something, again, where a lot of people are arguing for banning certain kinds of robots, what are sometimes called lethal autonomous weapons systems.
Yes.
Where the idea is that the robot or the AI technology would then select their targets and kill human beings. And that's something that, a lot of high-profile people, both academics and others, such as Elon Musk and Tesla and others like that, are arguing that these should be banned and forbidden, and that it's important to always retain what they call meaningful human control over any military technology.
Mm-hmm.
And when people talk about this, one of the things that they sometimes say is that in war, it can be justice for human beings to kill other human beings. What some philosophers call the moral equality of different combatants, so that in a war scenario, it's understood that you might get killed and that you might kill others, but there has to be a human that takes responsibility for this, and there has to be sort of a human on the other side. But if one side of the conflict starts introducing not others, or human people trying to kill other humans, but rather robots that take over that job, then that fundamentally changes the idea of a military conflict. Because what if someone is killed and they have been selected as a target by an autonomous system? Again, you get this problem of possible responsibility gap, where people might start saying, well, I wasn't responsible because the target was selected by a machine. I mean, the military setting, in a way, makes it a little bit easier to deal with these responsibility issues, just because it's such a structured part of human life. I mean, like, the military has a very clear sort of hierarchy where some people have what is called command responsibility over others. So if soldiers do things, then sometimes commanders are held responsible because they have the ultimate responsibility. And I think you can see how we could use some of that machinery from theories of command responsibility in the domain of military robotics. So if a human commander deploys a lethal autonomous weapon system and that system kills a human being, you could still have the commander, I think, be responsible because there's this command structure in the organization. I mean, you couldn't really imagine, I think, a military robot that's sort of operating on its own. It's always going to be part of a team. So even if you did have some sort of high degree of functional autonomy, meaning that it can operate on its own for certain periods of time, there are always going to be humans who decide to use those, who maybe decide to discontinue the use of robots, and who maybe try to update them and change their settings, etc., based on how they think that they perform in the field, so to speak. So I worry maybe a little bit less about responsibility issues than some others looking at the ethics do. I do think that there is an interesting question of whether it should ever be permitted to have a robot that's designed to kill human beings. And some people make a interesting comparison here with the case of the self-driving car, because the self-driving car will predictably sometimes kill human beings. But that's a side effect, not intended, but merely predicted. So, they have already killed humans. They have died inside of self-driving cars, and they've been hit by self-driving cars. But, of course, none of this was intentional. The intention is to create a safer type of car where fewer people will be killed, and there will be some accident scenarios. So that's quite different than creating a robot that's specifically designed to kill humans. And certainly in a lot of common sense ethical thinking, and also in some doctrines that are widely discussed in philosophy, theology, etc., there's a double effect. So where people say it's sometimes okay to injure others if it's a side effect that you didn't intend, because you were trying to pursue some good aim, you were trying to save someone's life, you were trying to save you were trying to achieve something good, and then you couldn't, but accidentally killed someone on the. You would, let's say they're driving really fast to get to the hospital, and someone steps in front of your car, and you accidentally kill someone. That's a side effect that could happen if you drive really fast with a car. But if you create a robot, or you have a human being whose main aim or main goal is to kill others, then you can't say that, it's merely a foreseen side effect. It's merely something that we knew might happen, but we didn't want to achieve.
Right.
Now you're designing a technology that mentally seek out targets and kill them. I mean, that's a lot of people who think about this topic. We should draw a line there. That's not something that you would want. So if humans are going to be killed by anyone, it's going to be by humans who can take responsibility and maybe who kill them in self-defense or something like that. But the more you have a machine that's making that decision, and the more it's designed for that purpose and that purpose only, the more controversial it becomes.
Okay. All right, just a couple more questions for you here. I'm in manufacturing. Sure. When I don't do radio, I do some quality control work for a manufacturer here. And I've seen a lot of changes in manufacturing over the last 25 years or so, to the point where automation and robotics are making a major impact. Could you talk a little bit about the future of work and how the ethics of technology sort of plays in the field of employment?
Yeah, so there are various different scenarios that one can think about to discuss. I mean, so one very extreme scenario that a friend of mine, John Danaher, is quite interested in. It's the scenario where automation and robotics take over most work tasks, and so you would have very little work left over for humans to do. So that would be what's sometimes called technological unemployment. But you also have what I maybe think are more realistic scenarios where people are still working, but they are working very closely with various kinds of machines and robotics, automated technologies. And that might mean, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that you have to make the environment robot-friendly. And so it means that ultimately you get better outcomes in terms of faster delivery of packages, a better products being manufactured. But you actually have a person who now performs a much less stimulating. They have less freedom to kind of design their own, how they do to follow the machine, because otherwise, you're not going to get those outcomes before. So you might get less freedom in how you work. You might have less contact with other human workers because you're mostly interacting with machine all day long. And so you start maybe chipping away at some of the things that we associate with meaningful work, such as creativity, the freedom to kind of craft your own job, how you do it, the contact with your co-workers. And so that, in a way, is a kind of very negative scenario, how things might develop. In one of my papers that I've written with some co-authors, we looked at, those are threats to meaningful work that might come out of automation and robotics. Could there also be opportunities for meaningful work? And I think in theory, you can imagine things. For example, you might, in order to be able to work with some new robotics or new machinery, you might need to acquire new skills. You might need to take on more responsibility, because now you are not only responsible for what you do, you're also responsible maybe for what a robot is doing that you're working with. And again, you have to maybe learn some new skills. And so these are the kinds of things, learning new skills, taking on new responsibilities that are also sometimes associated with meaningful work. So there's a potential for some aspects of this to actually create opportunities for new kinds of meaningful work. We looked in our research, me and my colleagues, both at this from a sort of philosopher's armchair perspective, if you will. We thought about opportunities and threats to meaningful work, but we also had a psychology postdoc working with us who went out and looked at how things are in Dutch warehouses where they're using more and more robotics. And there, of course, it was easier to identify threats to meaningful work than it was to identify proof of opportunities for meaningful work. And where there seemed to be improvements, there seemed to be mostly on the level of management, as opposed to the people who are sort of lower down in the work hierarchy. So I don't necessarily think that automation and robotics needs to lead to less meaningful work, but we really have to make choices to have a sort of human focused perspective on this, and not just technology-driven developments where we're just asking, how can we be the most efficient in terms of producing outcomes, cheaper, faster, etc., and make the humans adapt to this. If we want people to also have access to meaningful work, we may need to also think in terms of, can we slow down? Is it really necessary that all packages, let's say, are delivered as quickly as they are these days? Can we? Do we really need all the products to be perfect? I mean, in some domains of life, people sort of actually value some certain degrees of variation and imperfection, and the human touch, the personal touch, as we sometimes call it. So, so in a way, it's a kind of a clash between ideals. On the one hand, you have efficiency, speed, uniformity in outputs. On the other hand, you have things such as, interesting variations, maybe doing things more carefully, having the work that humans do that produces meaningful. And, of course, if you're looking at things from a kind of management perspective, just you're trying to make the organization be, not lose too much money and have everything be quick, then at first glance, it might seem like a good idea to just go for the technology-driven, technology-oriented perspective. But on the other hand, actually, if you look at organizations where workers have more, where employees have more freedom and more creativity, that also tends to lead to happier employees, people becoming more creative, becoming more, maybe, let's say, loyal to the organization, more willing to work for it, etc. So in the long term, it's not necessarily always going to be the case that what looks like the quick technology-driven solution is going to yield the best outcomes. But so I think we really have to make sort of choices and think about how we allow some of these developments to go. And we shouldn't view it as a kind of development that necessarily always in every domain leads to more automation, more robotics. In some domains, it might make things worse and not actually improve things, neither from a point of view of the services, the goods offered, nor from the point of view of sort of job satisfaction for the people working in these different organizations.
Yeah, okay. As a side note, I've spoken with John Danaher. I'm very impressed, and very thought-provoking stuff that he does.
Absolutely.
Let's kind of finish off with more of a philosophical thing. I would consider you a scholar when it comes to Immanuel Kant, and you have a very interesting paper on, I'm not sure if it's your website, but at any rate, Kant's universal law formula revisited is something that you wrote a couple years ago. And perhaps you could visit that a little bit with the listeners and explain why you think it's important. I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, so, Kant has this idea that ethics should be about a good person is someone who has their principles, who tries to live in a kind of principled way and follow certain rules that they adopt for themselves. And then the idea that Kant had was, okay, well, that seems good. And then, how do I choose principles that I'm supposed to be following in order to be a kind of a good, virtuous person? Well, a good idea seems to be to choose principles that you would be willing to lay down as universal laws for all people. So that it's not only the case that you take these on board as the principles that you want to live by, you should also ask, how would these other people also make these principles into their principles? Would you be kind of happy with that scenario, that your principles are also shared by others? And this, on the face of it, in a way, it's kind of an updated version of the golden rule, the way that you treat other people should match with how you want them to treat you. What Kant adds the idea of the principles that you adopt for yourself should also be principles that you would be willing to lay down as rules for other people. Seems like a great idea, very intuitive, but philosophers having the kind of, it's almost an occupational hazard that we always feel an itch to come up with counterexamples. We always feel that we, in order to sort of engage critically with something, we have to think about strange cases where if you follow the suggested rules, things somehow they get bizarre, counterintuitive, etc. And certainly this Kantian idea of principles that you lay down are willing to treat as universal laws. And that's a kind of key target of a lot of interesting counterexamples that people have tried to cook up. And some of that discussion has kind of not necessarily taken Kant's own explanations what he means by this idea as a starting point, but rather kind of a desire to find strange counterexamples in scenarios where this seems to be a bad idea. So people say things such as, well, if I adopted as a personal principle that, let's say, people of my own race, they should be treated better than people of other races. Well, if I'm a member of that particular race, then perhaps I could want this to be universal law because that would benefit people like me, but it would certainly be terrible for people of other races. So the question is, does the Kantian ideal of living according to principles that you would like to lay down as universal law, would it sanction this? Would it say that, yes, this is morally okay? And obviously that seems to be deeply immoral. So that's one example of this kind of counterexample that people comes up with. Other examples are things such as, well, if I just describe a very complicated rule, let's say I'm allowed to rob people who wear a certain kind of type of jeans, who walk in a certain street, and who wear a certain kind of baseball cap or whatever. You can devise the rule that's so rare that there's only basically one opportunity to act on it, namely the one that you're facing right now. And you can say, yeah, I want this to be a universal law because now I can rob this person. And so everyone could do it, but most people wouldn't have an opportunity to do it. But that's another kind of counterexample that people have discussed, like creating this really complicated rules that seem to apply only to you and that would give you kind of a license to do whatever you want.
Right.
And so I was interested in how this seems to be taking this idea very far away, maybe from what Kant himself intended and wanted to achieve by formulating that moral ideal, and kind of just twisting it around too much in a way. So I wanted to go back and look at sort of all of the key terms that Kant introduces when he talks about, when he talks about principles, he calls them maxims. That's a kind of old-fashioned word. And he talks about a sort of an ideal that he calls the kingdom of ends, where everyone relates to each other on the basis of shared principles in a way that he thinks would mean mutual respect, treating everyone in a dignified way. And if you start looking at all of these things that he describes as what he's looking for, then something like, racist principles, they just don't fit in anymore because we wouldn't have a community of people on shared principles. Everyone's treating everyone in a kind of dignified way. You wouldn't have a scenario where people would make these exceptions for themselves so that they formulate complicated rules so that they can say, well, I'm following the rule I was willing to lay down for everyone, but it's been tailor-made for your interests. That seems to clash with the more general ideals that Kant put forward in his general theory about. He also has another famous rule, which is he says that we should always treat the humanity in each person always as an end in itself and never as a mere means. And he claims that this idea of acting on principles that you'd be willing to lay down as universal laws, in a way, it's the other side of the coin from that other idea of treating people as ends and never as mere means. And so it seems to me that when you try to interpret what Kant talks about these different principles, you want to interpret those ideas in relation to each other so that you can spell out an ideal that would really fit with this idea of not instrumentalizing others, treating them with dignity, respect, etc. And a lot of the counterexamples that have been formulated against that first principle that we talked about, they don't seem to take into account that that's what he was trying to achieve. So I've been quite interested in trying to reconstruct what exactly it was. And on the one hand, I think he ends up with a very attractive idea, but it's more like an ideal, a practical rule that you could follow in every scenario. So like if you're thinking about how to, let's say, program a self-driving car, to get back to the previous discussed example, what it should do in an accident scenario, it's not so clear to me that you could actually use the idea of following a principle that you want to be universal law as a direct decision-making procedure to just kind of decide exactly what the right answer is. It's more like an ideal, okay, you want whatever rules you choose to be ones that that would treat everyone equally, that would respect people's dignity, etc., not treat them as mere means. And what exactly that means in practice, for that you might need to move to some other kind of principle than this more general ideal that someone like Kant describes as general moral philosophy.
Okay. Wow, I tell you, interesting times we are living in, Dr. Sven. Let's wrap it up, and we'll mention your book once again. You have a new book that's called Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. If people are interested in your book or other stuff related to your work, how's the best, or what's the best way for them to find information about you? Do you have contact information or Twitter, or what would you like, sir?
I guess actually Twitter would be the best, easiest way to find out what I'm doing, because whenever I do something new, such as, for example, appearing on your show, or I have a book out, or paper out, or a video I'm participating in, or something like that, I always put up a link on Twitter, and I think I'm the only Sven Nyholm on there. So, and it's certainly, if you look for, I think my Twitter handle is @Sven Nyholm, my name.
Yeah.
And so that's a good place to go. I mean, the book, you can already order it from Amazon if you're so inclined. So Twitter would be the place I would recommend.
Okay, very good. Well, I sure appreciate your time. You're doing really interesting and important work. I hope we can stay in touch, and as this stuff moves forward, maybe we can do an update now and again down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me on your show.
You bet. You take care of yourself, Dr. Sven Nyholm. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. All right, Dr. Sven Nyholm. He's an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Utrecht University. That is in the Netherlands. And he's got a wonderful new book, Humans and Robots, Ethics, Agency, and Anthropomorphism. You can find him on the web at Sven Nyholm on Twitter, and you can link there directly from my site from here on out. All right, great stuff. I appreciate Dr. Sven spending some time with me, and you all as well. Hope you enjoyed that. And let's take a little break here, play a little piece of music. You can all grab a glass of water or a beer or something, or whatever you do, and we'll come back and we'll do a little space weather and maybe open the phone, see if anybody wants to talk about anything. It's a little before 1 o'clock in the morning now on the 2nd of June, and you're listening to Radio Orbit on KOPN Columbia. All right, it's Mike Hagan, and I'll be back with you in just a few minutes.